My name's Andy Brown. I'm the product director here at Cocho. My job to kind of compare things a little bit today, do the introduction, but you'll be pleased to hear the majority of the presentation is from our esteemed expert David Guest, who's our solution architect and technology evangelist, which I think is a great title. Yeah, without further ado, we'll crack on. So in terms of what we'll be doing today, I'll just open things up with a little introduction about us, because that we've got quite a few people on the call. Some of you will know as well, some perhaps not so much. We'll literally just take a few seconds to go through that. And then I'll hand over to David and we'll get into the meat of the presentation. That will include some demonstrations of this all in action as well, which is obviously a great way to bring it to life. We do have an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. I would ask, there's the Q&A button here in the panel above. If you could please type your questions as we're going along, that would be great. And obviously, if you come up with stuff at the end, then there'll be time to go through all of that. So yeah, please do post questions as we go. Try and avoid the chat function instead, which is the thing that everybody does. So yeah, Q&A is the one to look for. So just a brief introduction to Cocho. So, you know, Cocho is as an organization, we're firm believers in the Microsoft cloud services, and in a nutshell, our ethos is all around connecting users and devices securely through to the Microsoft cloud services and beyond, in fact. And that it could actually be a very good summary in many ways of how we're looking at global secure access, which is a solution very much designed around that from the technology stack point of view. In terms of us as a company, Cocho, we've grown substantially over the years. There's now over 400 of us. We've got some highly skilled specialists. Our offices are based around the world. So 4 offices, major centres for us being here in the UK and a growing capability in South Africa as well. We've been working closely alongside Microsoft now for a very long time. We're a trusted pair of hands when it comes to being a Microsoft solutions partner. I'm delighted to say that, you know, we're considered a leader in terms of identity and security, which clearly, again, this links very closely in terms of the modern stack. And indeed, you know, proud to be able to say that, you know, we're 8-time winner of Microsoft Partner of the Year in certain categories, which is, as a global award, is a real recognition of what we do. We're proud to be able to say that we support some of the, you know, very large organisations here, generally based here in the UK, all the way through into mid-market and smaller organisations. We've got a broad spread of clients, and the company's growing. We're pleased to be able to say, you know, revenues are growing, and you know, we're on a good path, and hopefully seen as a trusted pair of hands and a partner for our customers when it comes to security and technology strategy. So that's the introduction. I'm going to hand over here to David so he can talk through things in much more detail and take us into the meat of the presentation. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Andy. So I'm David Guest. As Andy said, I'm a solution architect and technology evangelist, which means I get to talk quite a lot about some really, really neat technologies. Global secure access is just the latest in a set. And it's part of a suite of systems that's designed around controlling access for not just accessing your Microsoft 365 environment, but also about going to on-premises, talking to other cloud services. The Entra suite as a whole is designed around identities. If we know who somebody is and we know what their role is, we can identify very easily what they should be able to do. We can do the same with workloads, so system identities. We should be able to do the same with our customers, our clients, our partners, and devices. Because if we know that somebody has a device and we know that that device is good, then we should be allowed to let them in. And we configure all of this using the information that Microsoft and other vendors gather about us, so we can see what's going on. we can see that you're in the right place, on the right device, accessing the right system, doing something you normally do, and allow you in using the conditions that control that. And really, we want to be able to do this regardless of where you are. Quite often, getting access to services involves you being in the office, whether that's physically or virtually. The ubiquitous virtual private network, which brings you into the office and then allows you access, is something that is both a great service, but can also be an absolute pain to keep going and keep configuring. And that's where this new piece comes in. The idea being that within the Entra product family, we add on the capability of doing internet access and private access. Instead of firing up a VPN, you simply click on the icon for the application you want that's on premises inside My Apps, or you select the URL from your favorites and it allows you directly into the system, potentially also doing that single sign-on. If you need to gain access to a switch, a router, to SSH into a server, to run an RDP session directly into a server, these are all things that can now be done through that private access. But we can also do the same with internet access, controlling a user's access to Google or to Concur or Salesforce. If they're not in the right place, if we find that they're accessing from a country that's on a banned list, then we can block that directly using conditional access linked to the internet access. And this is all about making sure that we're connecting our workforce specifically to the right applications and giving them access to these applications at the right time. So Entra ID can link to external HR systems, Workday, SuccessFactors, and others, to provision accounts automatically. And we've known about this for years. We can now actually get a system which is an HR system and has an API to automatically provision into Entra without using any Microsoft code. That API has now been made available. We have the ability to bring in the external identities, whether that's a partner, somebody in a Microsoft tenant somewhere else, a Google tenant, or other places that we federate in. We then provision those accounts into the variety of services, whether those are cloud apps, on-premises apps, or a combination of both. Once we know the apps that you've got and we know how you can gain access to them, then we start to put conditional access in place. And this is the way we use zero trust to identify whether or not you're in a position to directly access those applications and whether you should be allowed to. Have you been doing some strange things? Are you at insider risk? Have you been downloading lots of files? If so, maybe we shouldn't be giving you that access. Taking all of these signals, all of the bits of information that we know about our users and about our environment allows us to make those determinations. And the internet access is designed to take that information and use it to define whether or not a user should or should not be able to gain access to services. And we do this against a variety of services, not just the internet, but also against Microsoft 365. And you can see from the graphic here that's changing the fact that we have the ability to request conditional access, to look at specifically Microsoft 365 traffic or public traffic, and link the conditional access to that, making sure that we have to provide an MFA perhaps for somebody who's accessing Salesforce from an unusual device or an unusual location. Now this sounds very, very grand, but what about if you've already got a system that's doing this? We've already implemented Zscaler against a lot of the services, and we'd like to have this working alongside. Well, that's absolutely fine. The global secure access client will work alongside anything that you've already got in place, whether that's actually still having a VPN in the short term, or whether it's having specific systems controlled by Zscaler or so on. These things are all relatively easy to manage, and we're supporting almost every single operating system that's around. So that could be Windows, it could be Linux, it could be iOS, it could be Android. So there's a lot there that we can actually play around with. We can also have this working with the adaptive controls and making sure that conditional access works. And we'll go through that, and I'll show you how we can add MFA to something fairly quickly. Alongside that, we have the private access. And this is really where we're looking at that replacement for a VPN, allowing zero trust networks to be available and in use for you as you're accessing on-premises services. We can allow access to file shares, access to web services, access pretty much to anything you want, all controlled through conditional access and all linked to what the user should be able to use. The support for this is growing all the time. Previously within Entra, we had the Entra Azure, an Entra application proxy. And I will keep getting that name wrong until the Entra name is sunk into my head forever. The app proxy works really, really well, and it sits in front of 80 and 443. So it's really good for HTTP, not necessarily so good for anything else. This new capability actually works at a much lower level. So it is TCP and UDP based. That means that RDP connections, SSH, SMB, NTLM if you've still got any, FTP, SFTP, all of these services can be used across it. We still link it to identity. So we will still be in a position where we're looking at who the user is and whether or not they should have access to that application. If they should, we will open up the relevant ports. We will allow them to access the connector, which is on premises. That connector is still outbound. It does not allow connections from the outside in. It looks and monitors a queue inside Entra to allow users to make requests against it. It's going to support the continual access evaluation. So if a user changes their password, we will get them to re-authenticate against all of their services. We're going to be able to support header-based authentication, Kerberos-based authentication, WS-Auth and WS-Fed authentication against those on-premises services. So there's an awful lot there to look at. And the access actually isn't over the internet. And that sounds a bit weird. The idea being that when you fire up the GSA, it finds a local point of presence to you. And it uses that point of presence to access the Microsoft global private network, which is the way that Microsoft have linked all of their data centers together. So it's a fiber backbone that stretches worldwide. You traverse across this private network and pop out close to the service that you're trying to access. When you pop out, because you're close to the service, you should find that latency is hugely reduced. Microsoft are aiming at a less than 25 millisecond latency from end to end. Not quite sure they're there yet, but that is the plan. Because we're entering and exiting the Microsoft environment, we're going to be able to do things at that point. So I'm going to go to a slightly higher level picture, something that's a little easier to see. We have a user who accesses the service through a tunnel. That tunnel is the way that they access the network that's linking our systems together. When they come out of the tunnel at the other end, we then see them again, and that tunnel then provides the access to the services they need, whether that's a router, a service, a virtual machine, or SSH or something else. And the tunneling is actually quite important. Now, normally when you think of a tunnel, you end up with something a bit like this. The tunnel is open, it's easy to get into, it's easy to get out of, because you're on the right road or the right train or the right tracks. Now, what we actually do when you're trying to access the tunnel is put something in the way. We put in a guard. This is our conditional access. That guard looks at the information you're bringing with you. Are you on the right device? Are you coming from the right location? Are you the right user accessing the right service? Are you allowed in at this time of the day, for example? If you are, then you'll be passed through the tunnel and you'll get access to the service. And that whole conditional access piece is set by the application. So if I want to allow access to the intranet globally, I can do that. But if I want to control access to an on-premises SharePoint, I can limit that to a specific user or group. So what does that look like? Well, we're going to go into a demonstration, and I will admit the demonstration is video based, and I will pause it at times because I want to explain what's going on. But it's video based because I've built up an environment that includes a separate laptop. And rather than be continually switching between this laptop and that one, I thought it was easier just to record the video. The environment itself is very straightforward. I have a demo network. That network has on it two servers. One is running Active Directory and one is running IIS. The IIS server is web.dgdemo.uk. You can try that in a browser later on, and I guarantee you'll see the same thing that I see. The domain controller is also running the connector that is part of GSA. So it is making an outbound connection to the internet, to Azure, at which point it is monitoring a queue. Within Azure, I have Entra ID, which is configured with an enterprise app. That enterprise app points at the website. I have allowed my user to access that, and I have an Azure AD Entra ID joined laptop. So it's managed by Intune, it's controlled by the organization, and I'm going to use that in order to access the service. What I've done is I'm going to provide access to the on-premises web service through GSA, and you'll see that website come up. I'm also going to manage access to cloud services. We're going to control access to Google. I would have put facebook.com in there as well, but it's very boring when you're seeing the same screen all the time. And then I'm going to add in conditional access to control the resources. And also as part of this, I'm going to show you what the GSA client looks like, at least at the moment while it still exists. So starting off the video, I'm going to bring it up. We're going to go into a browser and we're going to hit a website. Now at this point, I might actually start pausing things. So here's the website, and you can see from this, that pause button didn't work very well. In fact, that's actually gone back. Right. Sorry, people, the challenges with trying to control a video which doesn't want to be controlled. Okay, we'll try that again and I'll talk fast. So what we're going to do is go into the website. The website doesn't exist on the internet, so I'm going to hit a landing page, which is controlled by my DNS. And you can see here, I use 123.reg. So instead of that, I'm now going to enter in the URL directly to my intranet site. And you can see that that's allowing me in, and it's taking me directly to the guest family website, which is on my web server. I'm now going to try and access google.co.uk, and I'm getting an error message. Now, at the moment, that error message isn't clean, but that's being fixed relatively soon. If I go to the play at google.co.uk, I get a much nicer error message. Now, just to show you that I'm not blocking everything, if I go to google.com, you can see that that works directly. So it's not being blocked, I'm allowing access. And I'll also do the same for google.com and just show that everything is running the way you'd expect. Now, I've used there the actual intranet URL. A bit later on, we'll show you what that looks like inside of My Apps instead. So looking at the client, and the idea is that the client will be baked in to Windows 11 going forward, but at the moment it is an extra download and it sits inside the taskbar and allows us to see what's going on. So when we bring that up, the option is to go into the advanced diagnostics, and we can see in here there's a bit of a bug in that my username isn't complete. But I can go into the health check and I can see all of the services that are currently running. Obviously, they're all working at the moment. Everything is in a good state. I can look at the profiles that I've got set up for forwarding, and I'm going to expand this and actually take you into the internet access rules and show you that I've got things running through this tunnel. Some things will be bypassed, some things will go direct. I've also put in some IP addressing that is going to go through the tunnel. The reason for that is DNS. I don't have my web server available through public DNS. We can also traffic collect, so we can do an awful lot of diagnostics on the device by turning on the advanced log, by starting the recording, and use that information going forward to actually control what we're seeing and allowing us to resolve any problems that may come up. Now, if I add in security, I'm going to do this through conditional access. So here's my conditional access config. I'm linking this to all of my users with the exception of a couple of admins. I'm targeting this at an enterprise app, in this case, the one I've called Intranet. The Intranet app was configured through GSA and actually is specifically connecting to the IP address that I had before, which was an internal address, which is 5.131. And I'm going to put in a control. Now, the control I've chosen here is an unusual one because I'm using authentication strength and I'm asking for passwordless MFA. Now, that means that this will require something else that isn't a password. And that could be the authenticator app, or in this case, because my device is Azure joined and supports Windows Hello for Business, I could also use a PIN, and we'll see that as it comes up. So here's the My Apps page. I've already signed into it, and all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the intranet site, which is just off the bottom, and it's going to take me in. It's going to ask me for my password, which I will enter. And as soon as I've done that, it's going to ask me to confirm my authentication. So it's doing that MFA. And here I've got a passkey or a PIN, and I'm going to be using that to let me in. And you can see I've now gone to the website. It's exactly the same website. The only difference is I've now put that CA policy in front of it, and that's going to demand my authentication at each point. So how did I build all of this? Well, it's relatively easy. Inside of the Entra environment, we have this global secure access preview, usually on the bottom left. Sorry about that. Now, there are a number of options in there. Let's go through them. I've put them on the right-hand side of the screen so you can see them, but let's go through them in some detail. We've defined some applications. I've got quick access, which allows us to get easy access to the systems. I've also got the enterprise apps, and those are configured by me specifically for the things I want to service. There is an application discovery option here, but that isn't currently working, so it's a bit blank. We then have the connect piece. This is where I define my rules. I can download the client, I can connect to the remote networks, and I can also define my connectors. The secure section allows me to do security profiles and also the web content filtering. Now, I have a security profile set up, which is my controlled website access, And in there, I've put Google Sites and Facebook. Inside the Google Sites and Facebook, I've then put the URLs I want to block. I've given this a priority of 65,000, which means even without the GSA, I'm still going to be blocking this. So there's no conditional access, it's just using the client. I've then put in specifically the sites that I want as filters. So I've put in star.google.co.uk, www.google.co.uk, and also google.co.uk, all of which are then going to be blocked. The monitor section, we have the ability to look at audits. Now, those audits and the traffic logs are things that we can start looking at. Now, the audit is a work in progress, as are the deployment logs, but the rest is fairly clear. We can also link this to M365 and actually have those enriched logs, the sort of things that you're used to seeing inside of Sentinel. We also have the ability then to run workbooks against this, so actually determine what's going on. The actual traffic logs look quite detailed. There's a lot of information in here about what's being done on that device and how it's all going to work. So with that, I'm going to come to the end of my bits, and we're going to come to a close and then move on to the Q&A. So back over to you, Andy.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Yeah, good work there. Well done for fighting the technology and getting the recordings to work with you. So yeah, good stuff. So yeah, we've had quite a few questions coming in as we go through, but just briefly before we get to that, I thought it just worth again for those who don't know us so well. You know, this is something as a technology space that you know, in a way, cuts across a number of areas where we tend to focus our conversations with our customers. So we tend to segment into the end user compute areas, security, platform, and application. But this is one of the fascinating things about global secure access is that actually it's all of these areas at once and wrapping a security piece around all of this. So yeah, there's a lot we can dig into there, not for today, but it gives you a picture of what we're able to do out there in the market. So in terms of questions, I think it's fair to say they've been coming in as we go. I'm gonna try and work through some of these, and Dave, let's see how good you are. So I think one of the we've actually had a couple of questions on a theme already, which I think is quite interesting. That a couple of people have pointed out that this is similar to Zscaler, or Zscaler, I should say. How do we think it compares? Is it more feature rich? Is it similar? And how do the components, I guess, which is another question, match up in terms of component names versus the Zscaler?
So broadly, they are similar. That's a given, whether it's Zscaler, Zscaler, Netscope, some of the Cisco services, GSA, SSE, or whatever we're calling it. They do a very, very similar thing. The longer term aim is to not have a client on Windows for GSA, so it will be baked into Defender, which will be baked into Windows, so it'll just be there and it will just get activated. So that should simplify the deployment. In terms of what it actually does, yeah, they are pretty much aiming at the same market. There is one difference though. When you're accessing systems, usually using something like Zscaler, the IP address of your source becomes the Zscaler IP address. Now that means that for conditional access purposes, anything that's coming from a Zscaler address is probably going to be approved. And regardless of where you are in the world, that IP address is the same. One of the things that Microsoft have put into GSA is the source IP address and location. So regardless of what you do in terms of firing up a VPN or going through something else, your originating IP address will still appear in the logs and in the traffic, which means we can be a lot more safe in the knowledge that we know where you are and we're controlling it. I don't necessarily think that Microsoft are going to catch up with the other vendors on the initial release. That release is imminent, but given the amount that Microsoft can put into working all of this, I don't think it will be very long before they are feature parity, or in fact go beyond it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Completely agree. And yeah, clearly this is a whole new sector that Microsoft are effectively moving into. And as we see already, this is disrupting conversations that have been going on, and indeed purchasing decisions as people look at this. Very technical one here. How does the system cope with split brain DNS for internal?
To be honest, at the moment, it doesn't do it very well. The idea of split brain DNS is your internal DNS is not available outside of your network. So you have a split brain. You look for internal stuff using your internal DNS names, and if you're on the inside of the network, that works. At the moment, that connection to your internal DNS does not flow automatically across the GSA connection. That's why I have to put an IP address in when I was doing my link, but that's fine because it works. There is currently a separate private preview in Microsoft that is talking about allowing the split brain DNS to come in over that connection. And I think that will almost certainly be a DNS aggregator that sits on the device and pings your internal DNS to get the name. That's guesswork, because I'm not actually on that preview myself, but that's how I would do it.
Okay, good stuff. Questions are flooding in now, as I thought they might. So very simple question here. Any indications on licensing, Dave?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. There will be, we believe, an additional license requirement for internet and private. So what those values are going to be, we don't really know, but it's likely to be a per user per month charge. And I would expect it to be competitive with Zscaler and Cisco and everybody else. Microsoft 365, however, we believe will be included in the E3 M365 license. So controlling access and having a bit more security around the access to M365 should be free if you have an M365 E3 license, or at least that is what we've heard so far.
Excellent. Okay, well, yeah, and I think we're expecting news fairly imminently as well, aren't we? That things may well start to, you may start to see some more clarification in that space for sure. So, okay, thanks, Dave. Good question here. How does Global Secure Access comply with NCSC?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one. There's no real issues there because what we're controlling is the access to wherever you're taking your target. Now, as you saw from the demo, my device was managed and therefore was providing MFA through the passkey and through the PIN. And that's absolutely fine with NCSC and NIST and CIS. As long as we have that conditional access in place that is requiring the level of authentication that you require to get your NCSC, CE, whatever accreditation, then it's absolutely fine. If, however, you open it up for any user to access from any device at any time with no security, that's where you start to see things going wrong.
Makes sense. And I guess time for a few more. A good question here. I guess someone's seeing the possibility of I could use this almost like a secure web gateway. So the question is around, what about URL categorization and rather than very specific filters and all web traffic, for example?
Not quite there yet, although you can see it coming. We do have some of the functionality in Defender today to do URL categorization and split URLing, so we can work on sub URLs. But at the moment, in terms of the access to external websites, so this is the internet side, it's only on domain within GSA. Having said that, there is nothing to stop us putting Defender for Cloud Apps in front of that, and therefore we've got more session control and we can start to build more in, and also putting Microsoft Defender controlled by Intune in that and starting to block specific things that we want. And when we put all that together with inside a risk, we can then start blocking functionality inside a service to allow, let's say, blocking of multiple file downloads from Salesforce or from Box or Dropbox or something like that.
Makes sense, Dave. So yeah, I think, yeah, it's a combination of solutions there from the sounds of things. Okay, some interesting stuff here. How would this solution fit alongside Azure Virtual WAN?
In effect, they are similar in the way that they are connecting, but the virtual WAN is more akin to a VPN solution, in that you're defining your device and adding it to that WAN, and that's a always on connection. With this, we're defining a specific tunnel that allows you to get to a service rather than to the network. I mean, we could open it up to all ports and everything else on the network, but that would probably not be something we'd do natively. We'd probably only say, yes, you can have ports 80, 443, 25, let's go with 42, and because we're going to do RDP 1439 and 3389. But that's the only ones you can get access to, and that is likely to be the way that most people would go. Whereas the vWAN and VPN solutions open up everything.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. And I guess this is a broader network strategy conversation ultimately.
Absolutely.
And something we'd happily have a conversation with you, with the questioner there about. Nice one here. How does this deal with things like DocuSign, where it's a three-legged access from the endpoint? So client, endpoint, client, DocuSign, DocuSign to SPO.
To be honest, I don't know. I can see it not being a problem, because when you're making the connection to DocuSign, DocuSign is still going to see that you're coming in. It's just you're coming in from a Microsoft point of presence rather than through your original ISP. So that should still be fine. The document itself is still residing in the same place. All we're changing really is the access method, because you're going through GSA rather than going direct. Similar to if you had tromboning on your VPN and you access DocuSign through the VPN rather than going direct. So I can't see it making too much difference, but that's one I will have to try.
Fair enough. Good stuff. And not on an important document either, Dave. You don't want to muck that up.
No, I think that'll be a test.
So we're getting to the end of the questions here. So are we talking about the LAN address? And they've given an example of a 192.168, for example, that's a usual home address. Or are you talking about the public address when the traffic leaves the environment?
The way that GSA is actually set up at the moment, it's both. And if you were then to go into a VPN and pass that across, it would be all three. So you'd get the native IP address of the device, the IP address of the ISP that you're coming through, so the public IP, and you'd also get the VPN address. So if you're firing up your VPN of choice, whatever that might be, and saying, I'd like to be in the US, you would see 3 addresses inside GSA. Your local address, 192.168.551, your ISP address, 71.11.168.42, and your VPN address, whatever that might be. Yeah. They will all be visible to you.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Dave. Well, look, I think that there's been a few questions there on a theme, so hopefully I've captured all of that. And indeed, you know, ultimately, if you do have more questions, we're more than happy to engage and have a conversation with you about that as well. Actually, do you know what? There's one more. I can't help it. Will this work in China without having a 21 via net tenancy / subscription?
Probably. I say that because it is using standard internet protocols, and if from China you have the ability to connect to your home tenanted Azure from your device, then you should be able to open a relatively close POP in order to get at your private applications. The internet stuff is slightly different because GSA actually is blocking your access out. So that should still function. Whether or not it would actually enable you to tunnel to a site that China is blocking, that I don't know. I imagine that might be possible when the DNS piece comes in. But at the moment, because DNS is public only, that's probably going to be blocked by China.
And yeah, I think it's fair to say we haven't tested that yet.
No, so... I'll quite happily take my laptop on a trip though and try it.
No, good. It's a good question though, and look, I think it's a common question we see with any kind of VPN solution or service edge type conversation, no matter what the technology is. It's like, what happens when you bump up against the firewall of China? So anyway, let's wrap things up. So look, in terms of next steps, I'm sure one of our sales team would love to have a conversation with you about it. We have packaged up something which we think is quite useful as a starter to get you on the journey to looking at this. And this is the Secure Access Readiness Review. And the point of this is you can get one of our experts like Dave, who have experience of the technology and what's coming. And they will be able to go through kind of your environment, where you are at the moment, and also your applications, your estate, and what your goals and objectives are. And we can actually come up with a suggested deployment plan of how you can go about doing that. We can actually go beyond that into doing a complete proof of concept potentially, or pilot implementation of this. And just to emphasize the point that David mentioned, is this is something that doesn't sit as an either or. This is, you have the option to potentially do this as an and, which is a great way for you to actually try this in your environment with a view to seeing how it can coexist. So there's a lot we can unpack there, but like I say, there is a piece of work that we've packaged up specifically for this because it's so popular. I'm sure one of the sales team would welcome the opportunity to have a chat with you about that. But I guess for today, that's kind of it. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining us. It's proven a particularly popular one, this. Hopefully we've got through most of the questions, and yeah, if there are any more, please do feel free to get in touch with your nominated sales contact, and they will I'm sure pass things on to us to try and assist. So with that, we'll be closing down the webinar now, and thank you.